The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden hue across the desolate expanse of the Arizona desert. Dust swirled in lazy spirals as the wind whispered through the sagebrush, carrying with it the faint scent of rain that never came. It was late afternoon when a lone rider appeared on the distant ridge, his silhouette stark against the fiery sky. He sat tall in the saddle, his hat pulled low over piercing blue eyes that scanned the land below him with an intensity that spoke of both purpose and dread. Clint Harper tightened his grip on the reins of his chestnut mare, Ruby, as she shifted uneasily beneath him. The journey had been long and grueling, but this was no ordinary ride. His heart pounded not from exertion, but from something far deeper, a gnawing fear that clawed at his insides like a caged animal desperate to escape. In one hand, he clutched a small, tattered blanket, its once bright colors now faded by time and tears. It smelled faintly of lavender, a scent that haunted him every night since the day his dog, Max, had brought it back to their ranch. It all started 3 weeks ago, on a crisp morning bathed in the soft light of dawn. Clint had been mending fences out near the eastern pasture when Max trotted up to him, a bundle clenched tightly in his jaws. At first glance, Clint thought it might be some discarded rag left behind by wandering travelers or forgotten during hunting season. But as he took it from Max's mouth and unfolded it, his blood ran cold. The intricate stitching, the delicate embroidery, it belonged to baby clothes. More specifically, it belonged to his baby girl, Emily. Emily had disappeared without a trace 2 months prior. She was only 6 months old, her laughter still ringing in Clint's ears, her tiny hands clutching at his fingers whenever he held her close. One evening, while preparing dinner for his wife, Sarah, Clint had stepped outside briefly to check on the livestock. When he returned, the cradle stood empty, the blankets undisturbed, save for the faint impression where Emily had lain just moments before. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints in the dirt floor of their cabin. Nothing to indicate how or why she had vanished. Sarah hadn't spoken much since then. Her eyes, usually so full of life, had dulled into hollow pools of despair. She spent her days staring out the window, her gaze fixed on the horizon, as though willing Emily to appear there. Clint tried to keep busy, working harder than ever around the ranch, hoping the physical labor would drown out the questions that echoed incessantly in his mind. But the silence between them grew louder with each passing day, until it felt suffocating. And now, here he was, holding the very blanket that had wrapped around his daughter, following the trail Max had uncovered. Little did they know, this journey would lead them down paths darker and more twisted than anything either could have imagined. As Ruby descended into the valley, Clint noticed a faint outline of smoke rising from a cluster of trees near the riverbank. His stomach churned. Smoke meant people, and people meant answers, or perhaps danger. He drew his revolver from its holster, checking the chamber instinctively even though he knew it was fully loaded. The weapon weighed heavily in his hand, a reminder of the world he lived in, where trust was as rare as water in the desert. Reaching the edge of the woods, Clint dismounted and tied Ruby to a sturdy branch. He instructed Max to stay close, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're getting close, boy," he murmured, patting the loyal hound's head. Max barked softly in response, his tail wagging despite the tension in the air. Together, they crept forward, the sound of their movements masked by the rustling leaves overhead. The camp came into view gradually, like a mirage materializing before his eyes. A makeshift shelter constructed from logs and tarps sat nestled among the trees, flames licking greedily at the dry wood pile within the fire pit. Around the fire, four figures sat hunched, their faces illuminated by the flickering light. They wore rough clothing, patched and stained, their expressions grim as they passed a bottle between them. Clint recognized them immediately. They were drifters, men who roamed the frontier looking for trouble or profit, whichever came first. But it wasn't the men themselves that caught Clint's attention. It was what lay beside them. A wooden crate, splintered and battered, rested near the fire, its lid slightly ajar. Inside, Clint could see shadows moving, too small to belong to an adult. His breath hitched. Could it be? Was Emily inside? Before he could think better of it, Clint stepped into the clearing, his boots crunching loudly on the gravel. Every head turned toward him, startled expressions morphing quickly into hostility. One man reached for a knife tucked into his belt. Another grabbed a rifle leaning against a tree. Clint raised his hand slowly, keeping his gun holster for the moment. "Easy now," Clint said, his voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside him. "I'm not here to fight." "Who are you?" demanded the tallest of the group, a wiry man with sunken cheeks and sharp eyes. "What business do you have here?" "I'm looking for my daughter," Clint replied, his voice thick with emotion. "She went missing from our ranch 2 months ago. I believe you might know something about her whereabouts." The men exchanged glances, clearly uneasy. Then the smallest of them, a wiry youth with dirt smeared across his face, laughed nervously. "Your daughter? What makes you think we have anything to do with that?" "It's simple," Clint said, pulling the blanket from his jacket and holding it up for them to see. "This belongs to her. My dog found it not far from here. Now, I'll ask again, where's my daughter?" Silence fell over the camp like a shroud. The men stared at the blanket, their faces pale. Finally, the leader spoke, his voice trembling. "We didn't mean any harm. Honest." Clint's patience snapped. "Where is she?" he growled, drawing his revolver and pointing it directly at the man. "Tell me now." But then, something unexpected happened. From within the crate, a soft whimper escaped, followed by the unmistakable sound of crying. Clint's heart leapt into his throat as he rushed forward, ignoring the protests of the men behind him. Kneeling beside the crate, he pried open the lid with trembling hands. And there, curled up like a frightened animal, was not one child, but 5. 5 infants, all no older than a year, lay huddled together, their tiny bodies shaking with fear and hunger. Some cried openly, others merely whimpered, their wide eyes filled with terror. Clint froze, utterly bewildered. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. These children needed help, and fast. "You bastards!" Clint snarled, spinning around to face the men. "What have you done?" "It's not what you think," the leader stammered, backing away. "We didn't kidnap them. We found them." "Found them?" Clint repeated incredulously. "Where?" "In the woods," the man admitted reluctantly. "Buried in shallow graves. We dug them up, thinking we could sell them." Clint's stomach churned violently. "Sell them," he repeated, his voice dripping with disgust. "To whom?" "To anyone who'd pay," the man confessed shamefully. "Traders, settlers, gamblers. We didn't care. We just wanted money." "And my daughter?" Clint pressed, his voice trembling. "Is she among them?" The men hesitated, exchanging guilty glances. Finally, the youngest nodded. "Yes, she's the one with the red hair. We kept her separate because she looked healthier than the others." Clint felt a surge of relief mixed with fury as he scooped Emily into his arms. She was thin, her skin sallow, but she was alive, and she recognized him. Her cries softened into coos as she buried her face against his shoulder, her tiny fingers clutching at his shirt. Tears streamed down Clint's face as he rocked her gently, whispering reassurances into her ear. But the moment of joy was short-lived. Clint knew he couldn't leave the other children behind. They were innocent victims, caught in the crossfire of cruelty and greed. Gathering them carefully into his arms, he turned to the men. "You'll come with me," he declared firmly. "Back to the sheriff. You'll explain everything, and maybe, just maybe, you'll find some redemption." The men groaned in protest, but Clint's glare silenced them. With Emily safe in his arms and the other children bundled securely, he led them back toward Ruby, Max trotting faithfully at his side. As they rode off into the twilight, Clint glanced back at the fading campfire, knowing that justice awaited those who had committed such unspeakable acts. For now, though, his focus remained on the precious cargo he carried. Emily was home, and she wasn't alone. Together, they would heal, rebuild, and face whatever challenges lay ahead. Until then, Clint vowed to protect them all, no matter the cost. As the group rode deeper into the night, the stars above seemed to watch their every move, cold and unyielding in their brilliance. Clint cradled Emily close, her small body warm against his chest, her breathing steady and calm now that she was back in familiar arms. The other children, wrapped tightly in blankets scavenged in the camp, slept fitfully in the saddlebags or nestled between Clint and Ruby's mane. Max walked alongside, his keen senses alert for any danger lurking in the shadows. The journey back to the Harper Ranch was long and fraught with tension. The men they had captured trudged behind on foot, their hands bound with rope Clint had brought along just in case. Their complaints were met with silence. Clint refused to waste words on them. Instead, he focused on the road ahead, the rhythmic clopping of Ruby's hooves a soothing counterpoint to the chaos swirling in his mind. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, dawn was breaking, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange. Clint reined Ruby to a halt outside the sheriff's office, dismounting carefully so as not to disturb Emily. He handed the sleeping baby to Max, who sat patiently at his feet, then turned to face the prisoners. "Stay here," Clint ordered curtly before striding toward the wooden building. The door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing Sheriff Thompson seated behind his desk, sipping coffee and reading a tattered newspaper. The older man looked up, startled by the intrusion. "Clint!" the sheriff exclaimed, setting down his mug. "What brings you here so early?" "It's about the missing babies," Clint replied grimly, stepping aside to allow the sheriff a view of the scene outside. Thompson's eyes widened in shock as he took in the sight of the bound men and the bundle of children. "Good Lord," he muttered, rising from his chair. "You've got some explaining to do." Clint nodded, recounting the events of the previous night in painstaking detail. By the time he finished, the sheriff was pacing furiously, muttering under his breath about justice and accountability. "I'll deal with these scoundrels," Thompson promised, gesturing for his deputies to take the prisoners inside. "But what about the children? They need care, Clint. Medical attention, food, warmth." "I'll take them home," Clint said firmly. "Sarah will know what to do. She always does." Thompson hesitated, but eventually relented. "All right, but I expect you to bring them back here tomorrow. We'll figure out placement after that." With a heavy heart, Clint returned to Ruby and the waiting children. Gently, he transferred Emily back into his arms and secured the others more comfortably in the saddlebags. Max followed closely as they resumed their trek toward the ranch, the sun climbing higher in the sky with each passing mile. When they finally arrived, Sarah was already waiting on the porch, her figure framed by the morning light spilling through the windows. Her face lit up at the sight of Clint, but her expression quickly turned to confusion as she noticed the additional burdens he carried. Clint dismounted slowly, approaching her with Emily cradled protectively in his arms. "Sarah," he began softly, tears welling in his eyes once more. "It's Emily. She's safe." For a moment, Sarah simply stared, unable to believe what she was seeing. Then, with a cry of joy, she snatched the baby from Clint's arms, pressing kisses to her daughter's forehead and cheeks. Emily squirmed happily, giggling despite the ordeal she had endured. Behind them, Max barked excitedly, sensing the shift in atmosphere. "What about the others?" Sarah asked eventually, noticing the remaining children still slumbering in the saddlebags. "They're orphans," Clint explained, leading her inside. "Found buried in shallow graves by those men we caught. We couldn't leave them there." Sarah listened intently, her initial happiness giving way to determination. "We'll feed them, bathe them, and make sure they're comfortable," she declared, her voice firm. "Then we'll decide what to do next." Together, they worked tirelessly throughout the day, preparing meals, gathering supplies, and ensuring the safety of all the children. Emily remained glued to Sarah's side, her tiny hand clutching at her mother's dress as though afraid to let go again. The other infants, though wary at first, gradually warmed to the Harpers' kindness, their cries subsiding as hunger gave way to satiation. That evening, as the family gathered around the fire, Clint reflected on the twist fate had thrown their way. From despair to hope, from loss to reunion. The past few days had been nothing short of unbelievable. Yet, even amidst the joy of having Emily back, questions lingered in his mind. Who had buried those children? Why had they been left to die? And most importantly, how could such cruelty exist in a world so vast and seemingly indifferent? Little did they know, answers awaited them in the form of an unexpected visitor. As the fire crackled and the children drifted off to sleep, a soft knock echoed at the front door. Clint rose cautiously, revolver in hand, while Sarah peeked through the window curtains. Outside stood an elderly woman, her hair silver and her face lined with age, yet her eyes held a sharpness that belied her frail appearance. "Who is it?" Clint asked, keeping his weapon lowered but ready. "My name is Mrs. Whitaker," the woman replied, her voice steady despite the chill of the night. "I believe you have something of mine." Confusion rippled through the room as Clint opened the door wider, allowing the stranger entry. She stepped inside, her gaze sweeping over the children scattered across the floor. When her eyes landed on one particular infant, a boy with dark curls and freckles, she gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. "That's my grandson," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Oh, sweet heavens, that's my grandson." Clint exchanged a glance with Sarah, both unsure how to respond. "Ma'am, we found him buried in the woods," Clint explained gently, along with several others. Tears streamed down Mrs. Whitaker's face as she sank into a nearby chair. "Buried," she repeated, shaking her head. No, that can't be. My son, he wouldn't." "Your son," Sarah prompted gently. Mrs. Whitaker nodded, her voice trembling. "He was part of a gang. Gamblers, mostly. But when his wife died during childbirth, he spiraled. Started drinking heavily, losing everything. I begged him to give me custody of the boy, but he refused. Said he'd raise him right. Now," she trailed off, burying her face in her hands. A chill ran down Clint's spine. If this woman's story was true, then perhaps the men they had captured weren't entirely to blame. Perhaps they had acted out of desperation, thinking they were saving lives rather than profiting from them. It was a thought too complex to unravel in the moment, but one Clint vowed to explore further. As the night wore on, Mrs. Whitaker stayed, bonding with her grandson and sharing stories of happier times. For the first time since Emily's disappearance, the Harper household felt whole again. Laughter filled the air, mingling with the scent of fresh bread baking in the oven and the comforting glow of lantern light. Yet, as Clint lay awake later that night, staring at the ceiling above, he knew their troubles were far from over. The mystery of the buried children demanded resolution, and the scars left by greed and neglect would take time to heal. But for now, surrounded by loved ones old and new, he allowed himself a rare moment of peace. In the Wild West, where life was often harsh and unforgiving, moments like these served as reminders of humanity's capacity for resilience and redemption. Until the next challenge arose, Clint Harper intended to cherish every second of it. The days that followed were a blur of activity, as the Harper Ranch became a temporary haven for the rescued children. Clint and Sarah worked tirelessly alongside Mrs. Whitaker, who had taken up residence in the spare room, to ensure each child received the care they desperately needed. The local doctor, Dr. Bennett, paid a visit after hearing about the situation from Sheriff Thompson. He examined the infants one by one, his brow furrowing with concern at their frail conditions. "These children have been through hell," he muttered under his breath as he wrapped a thin blanket tighter around one of the smaller babies. "Malnutrition, exposure. It's a miracle any of them survived." Clint clenched his fists, anger simmering beneath the surface. "Who would do such a thing?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer lay somewhere in the darkness of human greed and desperation. Dr. Bennett sighed heavily, shaking his head. "I don't know, Clint, but we'll find out. For now, let's focus on getting these little ones back to health." With Emily safely nestled in Sarah's arms, the couple turned their attention to the other children. They bathed them gently, feeding them small portions of warm broth and milk to ease their fragile stomachs. Max, ever the loyal companion, stayed close, his presence providing comfort to the frightened infants. At night, the house was filled with soft cries and murmured reassurances, but gradually, the sounds of distress gave way to the gentle hum of lullabies sung by Sarah and Mrs. Whitaker. As the week progressed, Clint ventured into town more frequently, gathering supplies and speaking with Sheriff Thompson about the investigation. The prisoners they had brought in were being interrogated, though none of them seemed willing to divulge much information. Each man claimed ignorance, insisting they had merely stumbled upon the buried children during one of their wanderings. "They're lying," Clint growled one evening as he sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the horizon in fiery hues. They knew exactly what they were doing. Digging up graves, stealing lives, it's despicable. Sarah joined him, settling beside him with Emily cradled against her chest. We'll get to the bottom of this. Clint, I know it, but for now, let's concentrate on healing. These children need us. Her words struck a chord within him, and he nodded, squeezing her hand tightly. You're right, as always. By the end of the second week, the children began to show signs of improvement. Their cheeks gained a faint rosy hue, and their eyes sparkled with curiosity rather than fear. One morning, as Clint fed a particularly rambunctious toddler some porridge, the boy giggled and reached out to grab Clint's thumb. It was a simple gesture, yet it brought a rare smile to Clint's face. You're quite the charmer, aren't you? Clint teased, tickling the boy lightly under the chin. The laughter that followed echoed through the kitchen, mingling with the aroma of freshly baked bread wafting from the oven. Mrs. Whitaker watched the scene from the doorway, her heart swelling with gratitude. You two are doing an incredible job, she said softly, stepping inside. These children are lucky to have found you. Clint shrugged modestly, though pride flickered in his eyes. It's not just us, Mrs. Whitaker. You've been a godsend. She smiled warmly, patting his shoulder before turning her attention to the stove. Well, if you're done playing chef, there's a letter waiting for you by the window. Curious, Clint wiped his hands on his trousers and crossed the room to retrieve the envelope. It bore no return address, only his name scrawled in neat handwriting. Slitting it open with a pocket knife, he unfolded the paper inside and began to read. The contents sent a chill down his spine. The letter was brief but chilling, written in shaky handwriting. It described a group of men who had traveled westward, leaving behind trails of destruction and despair. Among their crimes, burying unwanted children in shallow graves, believing they were doing society a favor by removing burdens from the world. The writer claimed to have witnessed these acts firsthand, but feared retaliation if they spoke openly. I couldn't stay silent any longer, the letter concluded. Please, stop them before they hurt anyone else. Clint read the message twice, then a third time, his mind racing. If what the anonymous writer said was true, then the children they had saved were merely the tip of the iceberg. There could be others, more victims hidden in the vast wilderness, waiting to be discovered. Clint, what is it? Sarah asked, noticing the sudden tension in his posture. He handed her the letter, without a word, watching as her expression shifted from confusion to horror. When she finished reading, she looked up at him, her voice trembling. We have to tell the sheriff. Immediately, nodding grimly, Clint rose to his feet, tucking the letter into his shirt pocket. And this time, we won't stop until every last grave is uncovered. Sheriff Thompson listened intently as Clint recounted the contents of the letter, his weathered face growing darker with each passing moment. By the time Clint finished, the sheriff was pacing the length of his office, muttering under his breath. This changes everything, he declared finally, stopping to face Clint. If there are more graves out there, we need to find them, and fast. But we'll need help. This isn't something we can handle alone. Clint agreed, suggesting they enlist the aid of nearby ranchers and townsfolk. Together, they devised a plan to organize search parties, each equipped with shovels, lanterns, and provisions. The operation would begin at dawn, covering as much ground as possible. That night, as Clint lay awake once again, he stared at the ceiling, his thoughts consumed by the weight of the task ahead. The idea of finding more graves filled him with dread, but the alternative, leaving innocent lives buried and forgotten, was unthinkable. In the distance, the wind howled softly, carrying with it the scent of rain. Somewhere out there, among the rocks and sagebrush, lay answers to questions Clint never wanted to ask. Yet, he knew he had no choice but to seek them out, for Emily, for the other children, and for justice. The next morning broke clear and crisp, the air tinged with the promise of autumn. Clint led the first search party, his revolver holstered and his heart heavy with resolve. Alongside him rode Mrs. Whitaker's grandson, now strong enough to sit astride a pony with minimal assistance. The boy chattered excitedly, oblivious of the gravity of their mission. His laughter balmed to Clint's weary soul. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the group fanned out across the landscape, their shouts echoing through the valleys. Hours passed without success, the terrain yielding nothing but dust and disappointment. Just when hope seemed to wane, however, a shout rang out from the far side of the ridge. "Over here!" called one of the ranch hands, waving frantically. "I think I found something." Heart pounding, Clint urged Ruby forward, arriving moments later to see the man kneeling beside a patch of disturbed earth. The soil was loose, almost as though someone had recently dug there. Without hesitation, Clint dismounted and grabbed a shovel, tossing the first clump of dirt aside. And then they saw it. A tiny bundle wrapped in a faded blanket, its edges frayed with age. Clint froze, his breath catching in his throat. Slowly, carefully, he unearthed the body, revealing the face of a baby so young it barely resembled a human being. Tears blurred his vision as he held the child close, whispering prayers he hadn't uttered in years. Beside him, the others worked silently, uncovering additional graves scattered throughout the area. Each discovery added another layer to the tragedy. Each life lost a reminder of the cruelty that lurked even in the most beautiful landscapes. When the final grave was emptied, Clint stood, surveying the devastation around him. His hands trembled, not from exhaustion but from rage. How could anyone justify such acts? How could anyone claim to understand the pain of loss without feeling it themselves? But then a sound pierced the silence, a soft whimper, followed by the faintest cry. Clint spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. Buried beneath a pile of leaves, partially concealed by brush, lay a living infant, its tiny chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Without thinking, Clint scooped the baby into his arms, cradling it close as tears streamed down his face. Life amidst death, hope amidst despair. It was a miracle, pure and simple. Back at the ranch, the newly discovered child joined the others, adding yet another chapter to the unfolding story. As Clint rocked the baby gently, gazing into its wide, curious eyes, he felt a sense of purpose settle over him like a cloak. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for now, surrounded by love and resilience, he allowed himself to believe that good could triumph over evil, even in the darkest corners of the Wild West. Until the next challenge arose, Clint Harper intended to hold on to that belief with everything he had.